Our second reading this morning comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. On the third day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour is not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now, standing there were 6 water jars for the Jewish rite of purification, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Draw out some and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and they remained there for a few days. There is a Facebook post that has been going around. Now, I need to explain it to you because I know that none of you have ever been in a liquor store. But hanging from the ceiling in liquor stores are signs that say things like wine, bourbon, vodka, etc. And this Facebook post is this picture of this shelf, and you can see in the wine side at the back and in the front, there's a sign that says water. And underneath it is the caption that says, "Jesus must have walked by here." Recently, I was in a conversation with a group of other ministers. We were talking about what we did for Christmas this year. I was the only one in the group who was not a grandparent. They were all talking about this grandchild or that grandchild and the overabundance of presents. One of the group told of watching his 4-year-old grandson opening present after present after present on Christmas morning. And after what must have seemed like hours to this child of ripping and tearing and screaming and throwing aside, exhaustedly the little boy said, "I have too much, I can't open any more." Haven't we all felt that way? Perhaps the feeling of being overblessed has felt like that push-back belt-loosening maneuver at the Thanksgiving table. Perhaps the feeling hit you as you opened gift after gift at your wedding. Perhaps it was the surprise birthday party that caught you completely unaware. Maybe it was where your whole family, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, etc., all came to celebrate your 50th or 40th or 60th wedding anniversary. Imagine with me for a moment how the bridegroom must have felt when the wine steward came and thanked him for saving the very best wine until the end. Perhaps he was shocked, knowing that he had never intended to save the best wine till the last. Perhaps his surprise centered in the knowledge that just moments before, he had heard the rumbling of empty casks and the grumbling of angry guests. Now, imagine, if you can, how the wine steward must have felt when he was given that cup that was dipped into the stone jars whose intended purpose was water for ritual washing, not for wine for drinking. Was he skeptical? Was he shocked? Was there indignation? Was it exasperation? Then imagine how he reacted as he let the aroma fill his nostrils. Nutty, sweet, fruity, a hint of chocolate, aromatic. Imagine the sensation as the water-turned wine rolled off his tongue, as he moved it in his mouth, allowing its flavor to permeate every bud, as he slowly swallowed, allowing the flavor to massage his throat and his eyes widening in amazement. You don't get to be a wine steward in a day. It takes years of training, years of tasting, and this was the best wine he'd ever tasted. The days of revelry were coming to an end. And like sweet cream cheese icing on a carrot cake, this wine was the perfect ending to a perfect wedding. Imagine, if you can, how the servants must have felt when Mary tells them to follow Jesus' instructions to the letter. Who did she think she was? And who was this Jesus guy? Imagine their exasperation when Jesus points to those 6 huge stone jars and instructs them to fill them to the brim with water. 180 gallons of water. They didn't need water, they needed wine. And they had to go to the well to fetch the wine and carry it back, perhaps as much as 1,200 pounds of water. And then imagine their fear when Jesus tells them to dip a cup in that jar of water and to take it to the wine steward, the one who knew the difference between good wine and bad wine. And they were supposed to take a cup of water. Imagine the fear. And imagine that fear giving way to amazement as they watch their expression on the steward's face. And imagine them thinking, we pulled the wool over this guy. And the snickers, they knew it wasn't wine in those casks. They'd filled them at the well. And I imagine there were some other reactions as well. You know, that condescending family friend who manages to turn this joyous moment into an occasion for grumbling and jealousy. Or that ever-present bride-to-be in waiting, who along with the groom is worrying about their need to make their upcoming nuptials even bigger and better with this. They were wondering how they could get this Jesus guy to come to their wedding too. And of course, there must have been that miserly patron, the one who always questions the motives and consistently condemns the bounteous proportions and the sniff of extravagant food and drink and cost. We all know those people. We have them in our family too. But too often, I fear, when we hear this story, we don't hear any of their voices. I expect that most of us get hung up on the miracle that the writer of John refers to as the first of Jesus' signs. And of course, you know that a sign is not important in itself. A sign is only important for what it points to. John says this is the first of the signs that point to Jesus as the Messiah. But too often we get hung up on the miracle and miss the Jesus. We're unable to wrap our arms and our eyes around something that we can't understand scientifically We can't accept that the water could become wine. It happens every day, you know. It even happens right here in Kentucky. Water being turned into wine. But I think there's something else going on here. A sense of doubt that is within us when we read and hear these stories, that has nothing to do with this being a sign or has nothing to do with that unexplainable phenomena. It is a much more powerful and debilitating condition. I think we are apt to have trouble with this story, not because we're modern and sophisticated and scientific, but because we are so careful, so cautious, and so restrained. We don't usually make big moves in our lives. We make little ones. We don't usually ask big things of God unless it's healing. We keep our faith quiet, mostly to ourselves, safely tucked away in the confines of our church, or the Bible beside our bed, or that little place we set aside for devotions. And we keep our prayers cautious and careful. It seems to me that for many of us, the idea that God has big dreams, great dreams for us, is not even on our radars. Our lives are okay. Perhaps not as great as we once imagined, but they're okay. We're doing all right. There are always some that are better off than we are, but for the most part, we're pretty satisfied with the way things have gone and are going. And I think that's why we think of our relationship with God as a matter of how we feel, as a matter of what we believe and what we do. And when we really take a look at our faith, we don't feel all that close to God. And we're not exactly certain what we believe. And nor do we do all that much for God. We think our resources, our gifts, which Janet read about from 1 Corinthians, our talents as being limited. Perhaps not just limited, but they're scarce. We're not good at anything. Too often our focus is on our limitations rather than on God's abundance. As the writer of John begins telling us this story, he says that it was the third day. What do you think of when you hear the third day in church? Are there any other third days that are important in our lives? I think the writer intends for us, when he says that, to think of this as a resurrection story. As a story where there was death, they were out of wine. There was burial, they went to the well to draw the water out of the well. And there was celebration because that water was wine, and we have new life in a God who has power to raise Jesus from the dead. This is not a story about changing water to wine. This is a story about a God who can turn death into life. A God who can take the smallness of our life and make it big. A God that can turn our sorrow into joy, our sadness into dancing. A God who turns the world upside down. Even can turn 2 molecules of hydrogen and 1 molecule of oxygen into wine. If we are ever to move beyond the smallness of our faith, the sense that we've pretty much gotten all that we're ever going to get. More than we deserve, but all we're going to get. We must embrace life and faith as not our doing, but as gifts from God. It's not how we feel about God. It's how God feels about us. It's not about what we believe about God. It's about what God believes about us. It's not about what we do for God. It's about what God does in us. J.B. Phillips, 60, 70 years ago, wrote a book called Your God is Too Small. And that is still the truth. All of us have gods that are too small. This morning's story reminds us that God can do far greater things than we can even imagine. There is no way that those servants imagined that that water was wine. So we come to the place where we know and believe and have accepted the idea that all that we have and all that we are comes to us from God. And like that grandfather, watching his grandchild open presents after present on Christmas morning, God watches us and provides us with present after present after present throughout our life until in the end we come and say, I have too much. I can't open another. Amen.